The emotion of the day is jealousy. Doesn't seem to elicit any positive thoughts or feelings, or does it? Does jealousy spur you on? Is it a necessary part of being human? Today, I'll be speaking to Dr. Robert Hamm. He's a psychologist in West Hartford Center. I'm Pat Kazakoff. Stay with me. Hello, Dr. Hamm.
Good morning, Pat.
So, jealousy.
Yes.
Doesn't seem like a positive thing, but I notice in your blog that you call it it's a social emotion.
That's right. Well, I mean, I think many of our emotions are social in origin and nature because we're social creatures. Jealousy is one of them, and it does, I think, get a lot maligned. For good reason.
But what does that mean when you say it's a social emotion? Like, what does that mean to be a social emotion?
Well, humans are social creatures. You know, we live in a world with other people. And so many of our emotions are derived from our relationships and directed toward other people. So jealousy and envy, which we did a show on last time, and other emotions often are elicited by our relationships with others. So that's what I mean by a social, it being a social emotion.
So the word social emotion doesn't really have a positive or a negative connotation. It's just part of life.
Well, I think that it often is maligned for good reason, as I say, and as you were pointing out in your introduction, because it does create a lot of disruption in our relationships, a lot of emotional turmoil. But I think it's just because we are social creatures, it's just a natural part, being jealous of being human. So uh, it's not something we can simply eradicate or eliminate within ourselves. It's something we need to accept.
So you call it in your blog, you write that it's a three-person phenomenon. How does the third person get into this?
Right. Well, yeah, from our last program on envy, I talked about how envy and jealousy are confused. They're often mistaken for each other. Envy is a two-person phenomenon that I wish I were like so and so. I wish I had what so and so has. It has to do with our relationship with one other entity or person. Jealousy is a three-person phenomenon, and that's how it's distinguished from envy. So jealousy is I wish that Mary felt the same way towards me as she does towards Bill, let's say. So now we have three people. Or I wish I were as popular as Bill is. So even though there's no one person that the third person refers to in that case, it's a general kind of reference. So it still is kind of like a three-person entity, if you will. And that's just the distinction between jealousy and envy.
Yeah, no, I'm listening to you, and the distinction is very subtle. Is very subtle. But usually, when you have, I'm going to bring it up, when you have marital issues, they don't talk about envy. They talk about jealousy.
Right, right. Yeah. And often, I think the two are mixed together. Often, when there's jealousy, there's envy. I'm jealous of your feelings towards Bill because Bill has qualities that I envy, for example. So that often they are kind of all kind of confused for that reason.
So this this emotion, jealousy, this three-person this triumvirate is destructive.
Yes, it can be. I think again, Pat, I think that jealousy is a normal human emotion. We all feel it now and then in certain circumstances. It's not something to be concerned about in those instances, because it is, I think, um, I think that it is advisable that we accept that that's part of being human. But that said, yes, it can become too much. It can be chronic. It can lead to obsessive thoughts and behaviors that don't go awry in a relationship.
I noticed that there's a lot of literature that's based on jealousy, not so much envy, but jealousy is a very big topic in literature. You're talking about Shakespeare's Othello or Harold Pinter's The Betrayal, D.H. Lawrence, I think it's The Fox. I can't remember exactly. What is it? The Fox? Yes. So it's really an important emotion in literature and in human behavior.
Oh yeah. Excuse me. I think that perhaps it's a good. Yeah, you're right. It probably is a lot more jealousy than there is envy. I hadn't really given that much thought, but and why is that? My guess is that jealousy is more dramatic. It involves dynamics in love triangles and more complex kinds of relationships. That's more dynamic. It makes for good drama, good story, you know.
Mm.
That would be my
Right,
guess.
except when you're part of the story.
Yeah,
It's a little too dramatic, I think, when you're part of the story.
Yeah, I mean good as a member of the audience, that's right.
You mean watching it from a distance is very interesting, but being part of it. So let's talk about being part of it. So once again, the age-old question, and that's why we're talking to you, is what are the origins of jealousy? Like, where does it come from?
Well, you might not like this, but
I hope you're not going to tell me that it comes from the mother. Everything seems to stem from that mother.
Mother, not necessarily. The term that is often used in psychology is more gender neutral. It's primary caretaker. It doesn't even have to be a parent. But everything does. I mean, not everything, but often jealousy, if it's chronic, if it's a part of a person's character, they're jealousy prone. It does suggest that it derived from early childhood. But not in all instances. But when it does derive from childhood, the dynamics often that can elicit it, and this was, part of Freud's Oedipus complex, so he considered it universal, is that, if a parent unwittingly, not necessarily deliberately, encourages rivalry or competition between siblings, among siblings, or between a child and others, or even between the parent and themselves. That's one instance when jealousy can be sort of incited in childhood, or even given that rivalry and competition and comparison, these are human emotions and dynamics. Because, as I say, jealousy is a natural social emotion. So, sibling rivalry is universal, more or less. So, it is a responsibility on parents' parts to be mindful of that and to help temper those rivalrous feelings. Let's say one sibling is more intelligent, more athletic, or whatever it is than another. To ensure that the other children who are less than in those ways, that they're validated in other ways, that they're given the attention that compensates. So that's a responsibility any parent knows. I work with some parents of children dealing with issues such as this in my practice. But on the other hand, conversely, sometimes it's in childhood, it can originate from when children are they develop a sense of entitlement, and they believe that they can have whatever they want. And then, anytime anybody gets something that they don't have, they're going to be hostile, feeling that somehow that they have been given short shrift, that they're entitled to, and that can also create a proneness towards jealousy and possessiveness. But not all jealousy is not always derivative of childhood experiences.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you for that. Thank you that it's not all derivative from the bad parenting model that I keep hearing in your conversation.
no, I knew that would make you happy, but it's true. I mean, I mean, it's like trauma, Pat. I mean, post-traumatic stress disorder um, often derives from traumatic experiences at any time. It doesn't have to derive from childhood, but often it does. You know, when we have complex PTSD, when a child is brought up under very stressful conditions that can be trauma-inducing. So, like trauma, I mean, jealousy isn't necessarily, derivative of our childhood. When it does happen in our adult lives, whether or not we're prone to jealousy or not, it often happens when we're not feeling good about who we are.
So let me ask you, is there a genetic component to jealousy? Like if your parent was a jealous person, you are a jealous person, is there something there?
No.
No. And that's an easy answer. So the answer is no.
Well,
And
I mean, yeah, I mean, I'd have to say, sort of qualify that. I mean, um, we don't know everything about our genetic contributions. I mean, the jury is not totally out on that yet. I mean, we are still investigating what are our genetic contributions. But that said, I think that although I think our genes do contribute to certain traits of personality, jealousy, envy, things of that nature are more social in nature, and I think they're more derivative of our experiences.
by experiences and circumstances, I'm thinking about something that you said a few minutes ago about children, that it doesn't always happen from the primary caregiver, that sometimes it happens from the feeling of entitlement. And in our society, that's a word that's bandied about a lot, about this generation, the entitled generation, whereas in the past, in the 60s, we called it the me generation. There was a phenomenon of being the me generation. So
Right.
this entitlement that can lead to jealousy, how do we get rid of that? Because that's so basic in the air, in the community we live in the whole social structure.
Change society.
A little tricky.
Easier said than done, huh? Yeah, I think that it is partly a cultural thing. That was the topic of when we discussed envy, Philip Cushman's article. I don't know if it's so much jealousy as it is envy as far as being a cultural phenomenon, but yeah, I'm sure it does, as I said, if you have a sense of entitlement, and that can derive from our childhood experiences and from the culture of entitlement. Yeah, that's probable. I would agree. But I wanted to,
I have one more thing to ask that is on that topic. You have multiple children in a family. Is there one child that's more prone to this kind of emotion? For example, the oldest child vis-a-vis the youngest child. Is that a dynamic that you see commonly?
yeah, I know. There's been a lot written in psychology about birth order, and is that So I think that there is something to it probably, but statistically, it hasn't been validated over the years, many years of research on birth order. And in my private practice, um, I think that it's something that bears looking at, because I think it can have an influence, but I don't see any generalizations I can draw if that's what you're asking. I think it's more about how different children are treated by their parents, but also, the children's own personal talents and abilities and how they're treated, in society. Let's say that one child has a tendency to be overweight, and it's no fault of their own, and another one is very athletic or lithe and build. Um, and that's going to create a feeling of jealousy and envy naturally. Um, so that's no one's fault. It isn't the parents' fault. It's how we as a society and parents deal with those situations. So the child isn't damaged
So
psychologically.
what about the situation where you have one child who is very gifted, either athletically or academically, and you have the other children who are just normal, they're fine. And both those children don't have a great sense of jealousy. Like, how does that happen? Talk about, like, why don't people have a great sense of jealousy? Is it because they're very secure that that's their genetic makeup?
I don't think I don't think it's a genetic thing. If someone who is, let's say, deficient in certain things, they have learning disorders, or um, they're disfigured, or they're limited cognitively, athletically, doesn't mean that you have to have low self-esteem, because that's an attitude one has towards oneself. But society has, certain kinds of criteria by which people are judged naturally. So I think as parents, it's incumbent on them, isn't it, to help their children to feel that they're good enough, that they are worthy in spite of these differences, isn't it? And that's something that parents should be mindful and address with their children. So it does depend, on family constellation, because there are things that we're born with that are unfair. That's life. And society has values, whether it's fair or not, that favor certain children over others.
So what about, we always get back to this, but what are the tips to combat this little problem of jealousy? I mean, at a certain point, you might be conscious that you have this. So what can you do to combat it?
You mean if you yourself have jealousy, or are we still talking about parents with their
No,
children?
if you yourself, we've graduated from the parents where everything stems from, specifically the mother. In this case, not so much. You were very clear about that. You said the primary caregiver, and it was quite neutral. Your conversation was neutral. But what do you do what are the tips to combat jealousy?
Well, I think that if first of all, if you're in a relationship and the jealousy raises its ugly head, the green monster, so to speak, um, I think many people have a tendency to be impulsive. It incites emotion, um, and panic or anger, whatever intense emotional reaction they might have. So the first thing to do, my advice is not to act on impulse, because often jealousy is unfounded. Not always, but often it is. So if you act on impulse, you're taking a bad situation and making it worse. So my advice is, first of all, to sort of give some thought to what it is, and think about the circumstances and alternative explanations for what you're feeling jealous about. Um, if you decide that there's enough evidence to bring it up with your partner, or it could be a friend, doesn't have to be a love relationship necessarily, to talk with them, that person, in a way that's isn't attacking and isn't um, convinced that you're right and that the person is wrong, or that they're guilty, so to speak. So
So
you,
what about when denial rears its ugly head, that you have this emotion of jealousy because your partner is doing something that is over the boundaries, but your partner denies everything? What are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to say, well, he denied it, so it's fine? Or are you supposed to go forward? Like, these are tricky situations. They're more easily explained academically than they are in real.
yeah, well, yeah, I was getting to that. And let me just finish what I was saying in answer to your question. I mean, how do you deal with the situation? You know, without, instead of attacking, stick with the data in your emotions and talking with someone about it, to find out. So treating them with respect before jumping to conclusions. Um, and then you can also seek consult with a friend or a therapist to get help with, to get clarification, to validate, or maybe to help you see that maybe you're distorting the situation. But if when you're in discussion with a friend or a lover, husband, wife, or whatever, and you find that repeatedly that this is coming up, that one of the possibilities here is that your partner is giving you reason to feel jealous. Now, some people feel jealous because they feel inferior. They have feelings of insecurity. So it's not their partner, it's them. And that's where, it's helpful to be self-reflective, maybe see a therapist and work on their issues of insecurity. But it's not always the person who's feeling jealous, but it's the person that's making them feel jealous, isn't it? That person might be excessively flirtatious or unfaithful. And then to answer your question, they might be what we call gaslighting, right? That's a popular term today.
Mhm.
You say, no, it's not me, it's you. I'm not giving you reason to be jealous. You're a jealous person. That's gaslighting. Um, so, if you find yourself in a relationship where it keeps happening over and over again, and you've kind of really kind of tried to vet, within yourself, so to speak, are there any insecurities within myself? Um, then it does suggest perhaps you're with someone who's not being honest with you. And that certainly is a troubling sign in a relationship, isn't it?
And that's another problem. That's another problem. And it's
Yeah,
not
then
jealousy.
the problem isn't jealousy, it's your partner. If they're
Right.
giving you reason to be jealous, but that's not easy to arrive at. Often, if a person is gaslighting you, you don't arrive at that conclusion right away. It's a culmination of repeated events where you say, "Wait a minute, what that, it's like somebody is just completely disconfirming my experience. Somebody's, you know, crazy here." Um, so it's very confusing. And it's not something you can get clarity on with one instance. It's after a series or a trend of events in a relationship.
The first thing you mentioned when we started talking about tips was about people being impulsive. And I noticed you used, at the beginning of the conversation, you used the pronoun he, but then you changed to they. So I'm wondering if this is more of a male issue, or if it's more of a female, or it's really both.
Yeah, well, I don't know if there's a good observation. I don't know if there's any psychological significance to that. No, I don't mean it's gender specific, men or women, as jealousy doesn't, discriminate.
Right. So what are some other tips? I mean, the idea of not being impulsive and thinking about it and approaching just at the, when you're nice and calm. But of course, there's a problem with that also, that you take too much time to approach it and the situation keeps going on and on. So I can see how this is very complex, and there must be some other tips for dealing with this.
Right. I mean, that's sort of the subject matter of, I think, Dostoevsky's book, The Eternal Husband, the cuckold, so to speak, the person who sweeps things under the rug, doesn't want to see, what's right in front of them. That's just as bad as acting impulsively. I agree, because then you are really doing an injustice to yourself, and it undermines your self-esteem and power and relationships. I mean, what do you do about those instances? I mean, you would hope that there are people that are in your life that bring these things to mind. So, I mean, I have a patient, for example, who shared with me a story, an anecdote in his life where his spouse was doing things to undermine him, and he really did not see it until a friend took him aside. So that's what it takes for someone to disabuse you of whatever illusions that you might be sort of contributing to unwittingly. But yeah, it's a tragedy if you don't see, what's right in front of you.
Right, right. Any other tips, any reading material, anything that you can suggest?
Well, yeah, there's a whole host of self-help books out there, aren't there? And jealousy is a popular topic. So there's a book by Robert Leahy that I can recommend. See, it's called The Jealousy Cure. And there's another interesting book out there by a podcaster, Zachary Stockel, who addresses sort of an interesting slant on jealousy, overcoming retroactive jealousy, which has to do with feeling jealous towards your partner's past relationships. So those are two good self-help, I think, books that address the issue, but there's many of them out there.
Anything else that you can suggest for this, the jealousy cure?
Well, getting back to the issue of self-esteem, it can, that often derives from our childhoods, but it also can derive from our recent experiences. If you're not doing well in life currently, you're more insecure and you're more susceptible to jealousy, such as Othello and Shakespeare's King, that tragedy. Here's a man who's king, but he's very insecure and becomes, and then you have this diabolical character, Iago, who plants a seed in his mind because he knows that Othello is vulnerable. So it can be situational. But to answer your question, addressing issues of self-esteem, if you find yourself susceptible to jealousy, look within yourself and find out, is that coming from my own feelings of insecurity? And is that something I need to address to learn how to affirm my qualities, even if I'm not perfect, so that I'm less prone to feelings of envy and jealousy in relationships?
Are most people that cognizant, that self-aware to sort of look at themselves that way?
Yeah, I don't know if I could make a claim to what is most people or many people. So I don't know how to answer that exactly. Um, People are more or less, but there are. I mean, jealousy can be a very destructive um, emotion because if people are confused about where it's coming from, or even if they do know, I mean, it can, we hear these, crimes of passion in the news. It can be pretty disastrous.
Well, is it still called jealousy? I'm going to use the analogies that you use, that if you have like a partner who's giving you really, really good reason to feel jealousy, and you've made the observation and you have the evidence, so to speak, is it still called jealousy if you have good reason to be jealous?
Um, Yeah, well, I would still call it jealousy, but I mean, I think it's well-founded in that case. It's, yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Should we still call it jealousy or, um, but yeah, I mean, it's still an emotion. It still is jealousy, regardless of whether the jealousy is well-founded or not, or whether it's coming from you or your partner. You could be with someone who's very excessively flirtatious. Um, and that's partly a derivative of the person that you're with. Um, and should it be called jealousy? Is it legitimate or not? I think it's still jealousy. I mean, which raises another, I think, point is that jealousy is very tricky. I mean, people have different attitudes about its acceptability. Some people feel that it actually keeps passion in a relationship. Other people are less tolerant of it. So it is important if you're in a relationship and there's a disparity between you and your partner on the issue of the acceptability of jealousy, it's important to have that discussion about what are the appropriate boundaries.
Yeah, no, I'm listening to you, and of course, it's eliciting all sorts of scenarios in my head. None of them are good. None of them are good.
No?
No, of course not. But the concept of being jealous, and if it's well founded, maybe what you have is another problem, and that's like the partner
Yeah.
is not good.
But I mean, as I was saying, I mean, some people feel that there is a healthy dimension of jealousy. In other words, that when you are jealous of your partner, it shows that you give value to that person. And it doesn't necessarily have to be considered to be something that's dysfunctional or pathological. But people vary, with regard to their ability to tolerate it. And partly it's how we're raised, partly it's because of our experiences, whether we've been hurt, been betrayed. Um, but it isn't necessarily a bad thing. And some people kind of thrive on it to a degree. It's only when it then veers off into the dimension of creating unnecessary drama and hurtful kinds of reactions that it becomes dysfunctional.
Yeah, no, I can see how people can thrive on it, how it can push you to greater heights. However, I can't see how it will push me to greater heights, or
Yeah.
how I will thrive on it. But I guess it's on a continuum. That
Yeah.
it's not it's not a linear equation. It's really a moving target. What people are, you mentioned what people can tolerate.
It is, and it's complex. I mean, jealousy is, singularly an emotion, but how it is instilled in us, what elicits it can be, multifarious in many different ways. And it can be a source of manipulation in a relationship where one partner makes another jealous, one person makes their partner jealous because it's a way of creating instability and power in the relationship. It can be, a function of many different kinds of factors in our relationships, but it isn't necessarily bad. It depends on the person, the nature of that relationship. It's kind of complicated. Like
Well,
all
I'm
human
listening.
emotions.
I'm listening to you, and I'm hearing that there's positive and negative parts of it, but I'm only hearing the negative parts. That's my filter in my head, and I don't know what the viewing population is hearing, but I'm hearing that it's not a great emotion to have. So with that, thank you very much. Dr. Hamm, another very interesting topic, and I'm looking forward to next month. I'm just looking forward. It's always interesting, and I think everyone can relate to every topic that you bring up. There's nobody who doesn't see themselves in some of this. So with that, thank you very much.
Yeah. Bye.